Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I don't know why, but at the minute, I'm really enjoying small pieces of furniture. Usually, give me a big old cupboard or a big sideboard and I'm absolutely in my element. But I'm really enjoying smaller pieces at the minute for some reason, don't know why. The good news is my local charity shop has so many pieces like this. I normally walk straight past them, don't bother picking them up. But the last few things I've done have been smaller items, costing me less than a tenner to buy. And they've sold really quickly as well, so that's always good news. This little table falls into that smaller category. I don't know why, I'm just enjoying it. This would make a really cool little wine table or side table. So without further ado, let's update it. So as you can see, the before, it does have some nice detail on the top, but it's just super dated. It's not for me. Also, this tone of wood, no thank you. It's also got a little bit of damage here. So this around the side is sort of, it's been repaired. There's been a bit of glue repaired on here. So we're gonna have to fill that. There's also some damage on the underneath here as well, because again, it is a veneer, it's not solid wood. The legs are quite cool, it's got some nice detail here. But apart from that, it's in pretty good, solid condition. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it a clean, because as you can see, there is some dust on here. Usually this is sat in an elderly person's home, and old people just love their polish, don't they? And polish contains silicone. So silicone is something that will resist paint if you don't get it off. So lucky for me, I use Dixie Belle's White Lightning Cleaner because it's a deglossing and a degreasing cleaner, which means it will cut through any grease, grime, silicone based polishes or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to do right now. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll notice that I do sometimes flip my pieces upside down and start with the underneath first. So that's why I'm doing it with this one. I just find it a little bit easier to work that way. And this White Lightning that I'm using, this cleaner, is the pre-mixed version that you can now buy from Dixie Belle. But you can also buy the granules to dilute yourself. You can buy both kind of formulas now, depending on which one you prefer. It's the same product, it's just that one's ready mixed and one isn't. So this cleaner cuts through grease, grime, oils, any sort of silicone based polishes or anything like that. So this is definitely the part of prep that you never want to skip. As I mentioned, it's got some damage to the underneath of the lip, so I'm just going to fill that with a wood filler, because some of the pieces that were chipped away were quite large, so I do need something that is going to make sure that that stays in where it is, and it's going to be quite a big piece that I'm filling. And then once it was dry, I sanded it smooth, and you will never know that those repairs were there. The primer that I'm going to use is a 2-in-1 primer. So Dixie Belle have always sold 2 different primers before, and now they have reformulated it so that they just have one formula, but it does both jobs. So this is particularly handy on pieces like this. This is a combination of real wood and veneer, and as you notice, the top had a very shiny surface. You can sand those surfaces if you wanted to. It is a sandable finish. However, sometimes the finishes that do have that really high shine can be quite nasty. Also, the detail on the base, I don't fancy hand sanding that personally. So I'm going to use a primer. So like I said, this is an adhesion primer and a stain blocking primer in one. As you've noticed, I'm doing the base first, and I'm just moving the table around. And if you are using this primer or paint on spindles or any detail like this, use a very small amount of paint on your brush and slap your paint from side to side, from left to right. That way you limit brush strokes and you also limit drips and pooling with your product. I'm using an oval synthetic brush. Again, this is a Dixie Belle brush to apply this primer, and there's 2 reasons that I'm going to use this shape brush. One is because it hugs the curves a little bit better on the base of the table. The second one, with it being synthetic, means it's going to give me a nice smooth finish. So when I've got detail on the piece, like the kind of lip around the edge, I know you can't see it too well on the video, what I tend to do is get all of my primer or paint on the flat surface, and then without dipping my brush in any more product, just use what's left on the bristles to go around the edge. So it is quite an intricate detail around there. The last thing you want to do is gum that up with lots of thick paint. Equally, you don't want any drips because you're going to have to sand those out. So this way of just using what's left on your bristles after you've done a larger flat surface just means that you are applying that product super thin on the surface, and like I say, you're not going to have any problems with drips or pooling, and you're not going to have to sand any areas of texture out later. So this Bond Emboss has actually been on now for a couple of days because I just haven't got around to painting it. So it's been on for well over 24 hours. 24 hours is the recommended minimum drying time before you can apply your paint over the top, and that's just because it's got to do its job. It's got to bond to the surface, it's got to dry, and it's got to stop the bleed throughs because it's a water-based product. Any sooner than that, you risk the product not doing what it's designed to do. So it's been almost 48 hours, so we're safe to paint this now. And the colour that I'm going to use is Antebellum Blue. I'm loving this colour at the minute. You know when you find a colour and you haven't used it for ages and then you can't stop using it? It's like when you find something in the back of your wardrobe and you haven't worn it for ages and you think, oh yeah, I love this, and then you wear it to absolute death. Same with colours. So I'm going to use Antebellum Blue. Also, just before I start painting, I've got quite a few new subscribers on here and I always get asked what I'm spraying, and I always forget to say it because I just do it automatically and don't mention it quite a lot of the time. So this is just tap water in a continuous mister bottle. As you can see, it's quite a fine spray, so you don't get a load of water on the surface, but this just helps the paint glide on because Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint is quite thick and it's also very, very pigmented. So even if you add a little bit of water, it's not going to affect the coverage of the paint at all, and it just helps the paint glide on nice and smoothly and also makes it go a little bit further. So usually when I'm applying Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint, I will lightly mist the area that I'm going to paint. I also like to very lightly mist my bristles on my brush as well. That way you are going to get a nice smooth finish. Now if you want texture, obviously then don't do this. This is going to be a smooth finish. So the water just helps the paint glide on nice and smooth. If you've used Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint with a sprayer versus without a sprayer, you'll know exactly what I mean. It just goes on so nicely with a little spritz of water. You don't need a lot, you don't want your surface dripping wet, and I just generally spray it as I go because you don't want it to dry up too soon before you can apply paint to that area. So I'll just spray a little bit of water, paint that area, spray a little bit more water on the next area, paint that area, and so on and so forth until I've got a nice thin even first coat on my piece. Obviously the same applies to the top surface as well. I've just sped it up slightly here because exactly the same technique, and I'm doing the same as I did with the primer. So I'm getting a nice thin even coat on the top and then using what product is left on my bristles to just go around the lip to avoid any pooling. I just thought I'd show you what setup I have behind the scenes while I'm waiting for paint to dry. Just thought it might be useful for somebody out there. It might not be. But I work in an extension of my house which is classed as a conservatory in the UK, but I believe you in the US call it a sunroom. We don't have much sun here, so that's probably why we don't refer to them as sunrooms. But it's a conservatory. It is a building, it's just attached to my house. There's the kitchen, and here I am. So I've got a lasagna cooking on the cooker. It's quite handy because I can multitask. Anyway, that's not the point. But this is what I use to heat this room. It does have a radiator which is attached to the mains heating in the house. It's just that we don't use the heating very often because we've got log burners. So this is what I use to dry paint. It's really effective. Somebody else recommended this to me years ago, and this is what I use. You can turn it up or down, you can have it on spin mode, and it's infrared, which means it heats the objects, not the air. I don't know what that means, but I was told it's good for drying paint, so I bought it, and it is good. So yeah, I will link it. The one that I've got, because my mum's actually just bought one of these as well because she borrowed mine. Thought it was pretty good, so thought that might be useful for someone. Maybe it isn't, but I've told you anyway, so there we go. I actually spotted some little dings in the table after it was painted, so probably should have filled those first, but as usual I went in like a wrecking ball. But I have just filled them using Dixie mud. They've dried and I've sanded them smooth because I'm going to do a blend on this table anyway, so it's going to require more coats of paint, but I wanted to get a solid base down of the antebellum blue before I blend on top, because that's just how I prefer to do it. So these little marks that you can see are actually holes that I filled, or little dings that I filled using Dixie mud in brown and then sanded smooth. So as I mentioned, I'm going to do a little paint blend on here. I'm going to use 2 colours, and I'll show you the way that I think is easiest for this particular project. That's not to say that you could probably do it a different way and get a very similar result. You absolutely can. There's more than one way to do something, and that's very common in the kind of creative world. There's more than one ways to do decoupage. There's more than one ways to apply paint and get it to blend together. So the 2 colours that I'm going to use are antebellum blue, which is the one that I've just applied around the edge of the table, and then the one that I'm applying now in the centre is haint blue. It's a very pale blue, and it's just going to make it a little bit easier to blend together than, say for example, a white, because 2 tonal colours, so 2 blues or 2 greens or 2 yellows, are very easy to blend together, as opposed to something that is completely different, like a blue and a red, for example. That's not to say you can't do it, you absolutely can, but tonal colours generally are a little bit easier to blend together. So I have taken the haint blue right up to where the antebellum blue stops, and then I'm using the Big Daddy brush and a very light hand, a little bit of water sprayed on the surface, not a lot of water at all. You just want to keep your paint nice and fluid. You don't want it too watery because you're just going to get in a big watery mess. And then you're just going to use a light hand and really, really lightly pass the brush over the 2 colours. The first coat, as with the first coat of everything, is always going to look a little bit ropey, a little bit patchy, probably not perfect, but that's okay because we can perfect it on the second coat. So I'm just going to get this down as a rough blend, make sure the colours are kind of melted together as best I can, make sure I'm okay with the placement of the colours as well. And then I'm going to let it dry and do its thing. If you do get any texture in your paint, you can always sand in between coats, which is what I did. I just used a Dixie Belle sanding sponge, which is equivalent to a 220 grit. Once you've sanded, just make sure you take off any dust off the surface before you apply your second coat. So the second coat is going to be exactly the same as the first coat. This is just going to kind of perfect that blend and also make sure I've got full coverage of the colours. So I'm starting out with antebellum blue around the edge and making sure I've got a nice even coat of that, and then I'm going to apply my haint blue right up to the edges. So you can alter the effect of your paint blend depending on your colour placement. If I wanted more of a prominent antebellum blue with just kind of a glow in the centre, I would be making the haint blue a lot smaller of a circle so that that wasn't quite as prominent. But I actually wanted the opposite effect with this. I wanted more haint blue and just the darker colour creeping in at the corners. But like I say, you can alter the effect depending on the placement of your colours. So I've just taken my haint blue right up to the edges of the antebellum blue, and then I'm going to melt them together with my brush. As you can see, really light kind of brush strokes here. If you do find your paint is getting too kind of clogged up on the bristles, just take some off with a paper towel, and that's going to give you a nice clean blend and stop the colours going kind of muddy. And if you also feel like your paint is dragging on the surface, if it's getting stiff or if you're getting a little bit of texture on the surface, that's when you need to apply a little bit more water. And probably all I'm talking is 1 or 2 spritzes, nothing too much. because you're just going to have problems with them being too kind of watery. And you can just keep going. As long as you keep that paint open with a little spritz of water, you can just keep playing around with it until you've got your desired effect. So my plan is to add a transfer on the top of this, not cover it completely, obviously that would defeat the object of just doing the paint blend, but I'm going to put one kind of partially coming out from one side and covering some of the top. I've got these two. Now, if you notice them, they are very similar. It's the same artwork, but on a different scale and slightly different layout. So you can use them together or separately, which is really cool. So this one's called My Favourite Bouquet, and this one's called Roses and Peonies. And like I say, they are the same kind of artwork, but this one is obviously a large size. It's got 4 sheets, and you can make it into one gigantic pattern if you wanted to, or like I've done in the past, use it, snip it up and use it separately in sort of different, I did mine over some drawers. This one is a 3-page transfer. So this is one of Dixie Belle's midi size transfers, and they have 3 sheets in them, and this doesn't piece together to make a design, although you could piece them together to make one big design if you wanted to, or you could just use them separately. I'm going to try using a combination of both, I think. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to see what it looks like. I'm going to play around with some layout combinations and just see what looks best. So I'm going to end up using either one of these or a combination of both of them. That was quite an easy decision. If I was making a big kind of centerpiece across a larger piece, I think I could probably get away with using both size transfers. But I think the jump from me finding the biggest rose, or whatever this is, peony, rose and peony, the jump from me finding the biggest one on the sheet, which is this, which is going to be obviously most impactful, to using this alongside it, it's just not going to work. Like I say, if I was making a big old kind of display across something, then fine, but I don't think it's going to work on this one. So I'm just going to put that transfer away for another project, and I'm only going to use 1 sheet of this larger transfer. So again, I've got 3 and a bit sheets left over for another project. So you don't always have to use 1 transfer for the whole entire piece. You can just use snippets of it and then put it away and use it on another piece. I'm just going to trim away any excess kind of overhang, because that's just going to get in the way, although I have left a little bit around the edge because I wanted to just make sure the placement was going to look right once I'd peeled that white backing off. And it's sometimes a little bit easier to gauge with obviously just the clear sheet, because you can see exactly what it's going to look like. Sometimes that white backing sheet throws you. So I took that off and then applied the transfer with the wooden application tool that you get in the pack. I've actually decided that I'm going to use a second sheet of the big transfer, because I'll show you the reason why. This, as it is okay, but this is a very straight line here, and it's annoying me. I wanted it to be a little bit more flowy, a little bit more organic. So I'm thinking if I just snip this very kind of edge bit off here, I think that will help it kind of curl round the curvature of the table. So that's what I'm going to do. Again, I'm just going to trim away the excess of the sheet and put that to one side, because I can use that on another project. I'm only going to use a very small amount of this sheet, and I'm going to layer it over the top of the existing piece that I already put on. And you can layer transfers absolutely fine without any problem, and it's just going to create a nice kind of organic flowy pattern around the curvature of my round tabletop. You do have to seal transfers to offer obviously durability and protection, especially something like this because it is a tabletop. I'm using Dixie Belle's Clear Coat in satin, and I'm applying the top surface with a foam and dandy brush because that's going to give me a really flawless streak-free finish. For the bottom half of the table, I'm going to use a brush because I need the bristles to get in all of the detail. And I did 3 coats of Dixie Belle's Clear Coat in total. leaving it to dry fully in between coats. I don't think this project would be complete without a little bit of bling, so I'm going to use gold gilding wax around the lip of the table, and this is an oil-based wax that is permanent. You don't need to top coat it. I always do it last because it is oil based, so water based products won't sit over the top of this, so it is usually the last step that I do. Never forget to buff your gilding wax, that's going to give it a nice shine, and also buff away any excess product to stop it from being tacky. As always, I've got some close-ups of the finished piece for you. You can just see how that gold frames the tabletop perfectly, and I didn't record an outro for this because I'm not embarrassed to say that I totally got distracted by the wine that I used for staging, and I was very looking forward to having that little glass of wine, so I didn't record an outro, but here's the finished look. I hope you liked the video, and I will catch you next time.